Smoke curled up from the empty lot inside the camp, the scent of seared meat drifting through the air. Behind the fence, the Japanese female prisoners, gaunt and silent, lifted their eyes toward the group of American soldiers laughing around a grill. One soldier carefully placed glistening red slices of meat onto a tin tray. The sight made many of the women stare wide-eyed, torn between astonishment and fury. "You call this a feast? It's nothing but an insult to the defeated," one prisoner spat, her eyes blazing with fire. Yet beside her, another girl swallowed hard, her trembling fingers clutching at the torn fabric of her shirt. No one could deny it. That smell awakened the deepest human instinct, hunger. And then, when the tray of meat was suddenly carried toward them, the entire camp fell into a tense silence. This was not just food. It was a cultural shock unlike anything they had ever faced. The summer of 1945 marked the collapse of the Pacific War and the complete downfall of the Japanese Empire. When the gunfire ceased, tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers and civilians fell into Allied hands. On Guam, a massive prison camp was hastily erected to manage the flood of captives, including hundreds of women, army nurses, logistics workers, and even civilians who had been swept up by the tide of war. The camp stood on an open stretch of land near the shore. Barbed wire fences enclosed it. Guard towers of rough timber loomed over the perimeter, and machine guns glistened under the blinding sun. Inside, rows of canvas tents were packed tightly, where prisoners lay shoulder to shoulder at night. The sound of crashing waves blended with the whistling wind through the fences, but neither could drown out the sobs of young women weeping for their homes, their families, their vanished country. Life was harsh. They were issued rice, sometimes with canned fish or stale bread, yet hunger never left them. Their bodies, long accustomed to Japan's simple diet, rebelled against strange canned rations. Many suffered stomach pains, malaria, or skin diseases spreading across their frail bodies. But the deepest wound was not physical, it was spiritual. In Japanese culture, to be captured alive was an unhealable disgrace. They had once sworn to die rather than fall into enemy hands. Yet here they were, alive, imprisoned, forced to face their shame day after day. At first, many women flatly refused the food offered by the Americans. "Better to die than betray our homeland," whispered a young nurse as she tucked her ration away, only to collapse days later in the yard from exhaustion. The others watched in horror. A divide began to grow. Some remained resolute in honor, others slowly bent beneath the weight of survival. Meanwhile, the American guards lived in another world entirely. They joked, shouted, played volleyball, and indulged in something uniquely American, barbecue. On weekends, they hauled out crates of beef, pork ribs, and sausages, lit makeshift grills, and brushed thick, sweet sauce across the meat. Flames flickered, smoke curled upward, carrying a rich, intoxicating aroma into the sky. That smell drifted past the barbed wire, into the tents where Japanese women sat huddled. Some covered their noses in disgust, their faces twisted as if mocked. Others stared silently, eyes locked on the smoke drifting lazily upward, swallowing hard without realizing it. Hunger clawed at them, yet pride built a wall that kept them still. The sea breeze carried the barbecue scent across the camp. Dozens of prisoners stared out in silence until suddenly one older woman began to cry. She did not weep for hunger, but because the smell reminded her of grilled fish during Oban festivals back home, when her family would gather around the fire. That memory now returned as a wound too sharp to bear. It was then that a group of American soldiers approached the fence, carrying a tin tray piled high with steaming barbecue. A young officer with sunburned skin called out in broken Japanese, "War is over. Eat. Try." The air froze. All eyes locked on the sizzling meat, smoke rising in the heat. Some prisoners flushed with anger, whispering that it was an insult. Yet others trembled, as if pulled by an irresistible force. In that moment, it was no longer about eating or not eating. It was about the violent clash of cultures, about the struggle between instinct and honor. A simple American cookout had become the greatest test these Japanese women would face: remain loyal to the emperor or admit they were human beings desperate to survive. The tray of glistening meat was placed just outside the fence. The sweetness of barbecue sauce, the rich fat of charred edges, the crackle and hiss of dripping juices, all of it held every gaze in thrall. Silence pressed down so heavily that even the crash of waves seemed distant. The American officer stood there with a smile, half mocking, half inviting, waiting for their response. He didn't need words. The tray itself was a challenge. Will you admit your hunger? A young prisoner, barely in her 20s, stepped forward, then froze. Her eyes darted between the tray and the stern faces of her elders. Their gaze burned her with shame, and she quickly retreated. Yet everyone had seen it, the longing in her eyes. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Don't forget, we are Japanese. We don't eat the enemy's food. But another voice, trembling, broke through. If we don't eat, we'll die. Is death the only way to keep honor? The rift split wider. Wives and daughters of officers stood firm, lips bleeding where they bit down to resist. Others, weakened by hunger, stared with desperate eyes. Suddenly, an American soldier pushed a skewer through the fence into the hands of a frail woman. She shook, hesitated, then, compelled by instinct, bit down. The crack of teeth against char echoed, and flavor burst across her tongue. Tears streamed down her face. It wasn't just the taste. It was the shock of something foreign, something impossibly delicious, handed to her by the enemy. The camp erupted. Some screamed betrayal, shaming her as dishonorable. Others stared with quiet sympathy, their own hunger gnawing. The officer smiled faintly and offered another skewer. A young girl reached for it, and the uproar grew louder. "You're no longer Japanese women," voices shouted. The air thickened with tension, as if a new battle was about to ignite inside the wire. Then came the most startling moment. A woman known for her defiance, the widow of a naval officer killed in battle, stepped forward. Everyone waited for her to scold the weak. Instead, after a long pause, she took a piece of meat, raised it to her lips, and bit deeply. The camp froze. Shock rippled, not just that she had eaten, but because of her eyes. They did not look defeated. They held the bitter recognition of truth. They were no longer in Japan. They were prisoners. To survive, they had to accept reality, even if it came from the enemy's hand. The stillness broke with a cry. "Have you forgotten your vow to the emperor? To eat the enemy's meat is to betray Japan." The accusation pierced those who had tasted the barbecue. They bowed their heads in shame, but in their eyes flickered something else, the light of life regained. Arguments erupted. Some defended them, saying food was not a weapon, and hunger was the real enemy. Others shouted of Bushido, of loyalty, of noble death. Tents filled with whispers, muffled sobs, furtive glances at lips still tinged with the taste of charred sauce. The flavor had seeped into their blood, impossible to erase. The night wind carried salt from the sea. Outwardly, the camp remained calm, but inside, hearts trembled. A soldier's cookout had cut a line straight through their souls. Loyalty or survival, honor or instinct. From that night on, no one looked at each other the same. One meal had cracked the walls of pride built over months. And questions lingered. Was this just food, or a new kind of invasion, quieter and more dangerous than any weapon? The barbecue meat was still hot in their mouths, yet for many of the Japanese women prisoners, it no longer felt like food from the enemy. That strange sweet and salty taste seemed to unlock a door of memory they had locked away the day they left home. The frail woman who had taken the first bite sat frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. She did not cry from shame, as the others believed. She cried because, in that fleeting moment, she was back at the little fish market by Osaka Bay, where she once followed her mother at dawn, picking out fresh mackerel before grilling it over glowing charcoal. The smell of charred fish, the salty air of the sea, the laughter of her family, all of it came rushing back. And now, the smoky scent of American barbecue, so different, yet just as rich, shook her to her core with longing. Another young girl, only 18, held the meat in her mouth and suddenly thought of the Oban festival in her village. Red lanterns swayed at the gates. Children ran laughing around the shrine, and the family table overflowed with skewers of yakitori. The sweetness on her tongue pulled her back to that memory of peace and joy that war had stolen forever. A nurse, once stationed at a field hospital, remembered her father, a rice farmer. Before she left for the front, he always placed before her a bowl of steaming white rice with a single red pickled plum in the center. Umeboshi, the symbol of endurance and strength. Now, as she swallowed the fatty, smoky meat, her throat tightened. Its richness clashed sharply with the sour taste she had once cherished, reminding her how far she had drifted from home. No one spoke, but the conflict showed in their eyes. Every American flavor they swallowed cut like a blade, reviving Japanese memories. They felt both intoxicated and wounded. At last, an older prisoner, once a school teacher, spoke softly. "This is not just meat. This is memory awakened. Don't you hear it? This smoke is not only theirs, it is ours too, the smoke of our homeland, of the days before war." Her words made many bow their heads, unable to admit that in that instant, home had never felt closer. Yet this awakening brought guilt. Those who had not eaten looked at their companions with a mix of pity and anger. They asked themselves, if one piece of barbecue could shake their memories, how long before their hearts turned toward the enemy? That night, some women sat hugging their knees in the dark, eyes closed, recalling houses, parents, and simple family meals. The barbecue had ignited memory, and memory bled like an old wound. The more they remembered, the more they knew they could never return. One whispered, "If I am ever free, I will go home, and I will grill mackerel with my mother again." Her words drifted through the camp like a prayer, and many wept, knowing freedom was far away. For the American soldiers, it was just another barbecue. But for the Japanese women, it was a door to memory, sweet yet cruel. They were no longer prisoners consumed only by resentment. They were beginning a new struggle to preserve the fragments of memory while reality tried to erase them with the alien smoke of barbecue. From that night on, in whispered conversations, they no longer spoke of the emperor or of honor. Instead, they spoke of families, of hometowns, of meals from long ago. A foreign dish had awakened their Japanese past, and it was those memories, not military discipline, that held them together through the long days of captivity. After that first night of barbecue, the atmosphere in the Japanese prison camp was never the same. The smoke had faded, the meat long gone, yet its aftertaste lingered in every glance, every breath. Those who had eaten could not hide it. The sweet, fatty flavor still clung to their tongues, a secret that felt both dangerous and strangely comforting. Those who had not eaten looked upon them with cold eyes, part contempt, part suspicion. The next day, under the punishing sun, the divide became unmistakable. Inside one of the tents, an older woman, the widow of a high-ranking officer who had died in battle, rose to her feet. Her voice was sharp as a blade. "Have you already forgotten your vow to the emperor? Was a whiff of smoke enough to strip away your honor?" The tent fell into silence. Those who had tasted barbecue lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze. But then the young girl who had nervously taken the skewer from an American soldier spoke up. Her voice shook, yet carried defiance. "We swore an oath, yes. But can an oath feed us? Must we starve to death just to prove loyalty?" Her words struck like a slap across the silence. Another woman cried out in fury, "Grease from the enemy's meat still stains your lips, and you dare speak of loyalty? You are no longer Japanese." Shouts erupted, filling the camp. Yet from the other side came voices of defense. "She's right. If we all die here, will the emperor even know, or will only our families grieve?" The arguments grew louder, more bitter. What began as whispered insults turned into slaps, shoves, and screams. The older women, clinging to tradition, lashed out with harsh words and even blows. But the younger ones, exhausted from hunger, pushed back with equal force. "We want to live. We don't want our bones buried in the soil of the enemy." Tears, curses, and angry cries tangled together in the sweltering air. The barbed wire needed no American guards, for within the camp another fence had risen, one dividing pride from survival. By late afternoon, the tension reached its peak. Perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of mockery, an American guard tossed a sack of bread over the fence. The bag landed in the dirt, right between the two glaring factions. No one moved at first. Both sides waited, breaths quick and shallow. Then a frail young girl stepped forward. She bent down, hands trembling, and clutched the bread to her chest as if it were treasure. But before she could retreat, an older woman stormed up, ripped the sack from her arms, hurled it to the ground, and shouted, "Traitor! You are unworthy to be called a daughter of Japan." The girl collapsed in sobs, her thin shoulders shaking. Her companions rushed to her side, shouting back through their tears, "What use is honor when our stomachs are empty? Will pride fill our bellies?" Rage erupted. Blows fell, hands struck, curses tore through the air. American guards rushed in, whistles shrieking, rifles raised. They forced the women apart, driving the two groups into separate rows of tents. From that day forward, the camp bore a scar that would not heal. One side branded the others meat eaters of the enemy, while the others spat back. Honor cannot feed an empty stomach. Abgun. When night fell, the women who had eaten sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the sea. They knew they were despised, but inside a dangerous thought smoldered. Perhaps they were the truly courageous ones, the ones willing to break invisible chains to survive. And those who clung to honor, were they not already as good as dead? Yet among the loyalists, doubts crept in too. Alone in their tents, some asked themselves, what was the use of honor if tomorrow brought only weakness, collapse, and death? The question gnawed at them in the dark, turning their dreams into restless nightmares. One night, the very woman who had scolded the loudest slipped quietly to the fence. An American soldier stared in surprise as she held out a trembling hand and whispered for a scrap of bread. No one else was meant to see, but a few eyes caught the scene in silence. From that moment, the divide was no longer clean. Cracks spread inward, fissures through every heart, where pride and survival wrestled in bitter silence. Life in the camp went on, but peace never returned. Each mealtime became a battlefield. Each wisp of smoke from the American grills was a cruel reminder they were changing bit by bit, not by bullets or bayonets, but by hunger and the smell of barbecue. To the Americans, it was just meat, just bread, simple comforts in a faraway war. But for the Japanese women, it was another war entirely. A war with no clear victors, only the slow erosion of faith and the awakening of desires they were too ashamed to admit. In the days following the conflict inside the camp, a heavy silence settled. The shouts and blows were gone, but suspicion still burned quietly, like embers that refused to die. Each time the Americans lit their grill, the smoke of barbecue drifted over the wire, and with it came waves of unrest that rippled through the prisoners' hearts. One morning, in the damp gloom of a tent, an older woman with silver hair whispered, "Don't you see? They don't need to force us. All they have to do is cook. This smoke has shaken more spirits than any gun." Her words silenced those around her. Everyone understood what she meant. During the war, they had been taught that the enemy was a demon, an evil to be hated to the core. Yet here, a simple meal had unsettled their hatred. A young woman, once a battlefield nurse, admitted softly, "I never thought food could be so powerful. It makes me think of home, but it also makes me see that the enemy is human too." Her confession hung in the air. Until now, the word enemy had always meant blood and vengeance. But when they watched the American soldiers laughing and joking around the grill, they saw something else. Young men far from home, clinging to the comfort of fire, smoke, and flavor. The change was not sudden. It came in small, repeated gestures. Once, a young American soldier handed a prisoner a piece of bread along with a shy smile. Another time, one whistled while tending the meat, and the cheerful tune made a few women smile in spite of themselves. These fleeting moments were cracks in the wall of pride. One evening, a middle-aged teacher, respected for her calmness, summed it up. Barbecue is not just food. It is a symbol. For them, it means family, community, freedom. When they bring it before us, they are offering more than meat. They are bringing America itself. Her words sowed unease. Was this a weapon of another kind, designed not to break their bodies, but to soften their resolve, to make them forget hatred and accept the enemy as part of life? But not everyone saw it as a threat. Some prisoners found in it a rare spark of hope. One whispered to her friend, "If they can laugh and share food, then maybe war doesn't have to last forever. Maybe the world could be different if we had understood each other sooner." That thought left many in deep reflection. To some, barbecue was poison for the spirit. To others, it was proof of humanity, something war had almost erased. At night, the arguments carried on in hushed tones. No one dared raise their voice, but the question haunted them all. Was honor and hatred enough to sustain life, or was it food, smiles, and small acts of sharing that truly kept them alive? On rainy days, when the grills lay cold and silent, the camp smelled only of damp and mold. Then they realized they had grown accustomed to the smoky scent wafting in the air. Its absence felt like a strange emptiness. And in that emptiness, they understood that something so ordinary had already carved a place in their minds. One evening, as the prisoners watched the Americans gather around the fire again, a woman broke down in tears. When her friends asked why, she answered, "Because I see now we are not so different from them. They miss their families too. They cling to food to survive their distance from home. And we are the ones still shackled by invisible chains." No one replied. Deep down, they all knew she was right. Gradually, barbecue ceased to be just the smell of grilled meat. It became a metaphor of the freedom they had lost, of American culture seeping into the lives of the imprisoned, and of the fragility of loyalty when confronted with hunger and reality. The camp was still a camp, the fences still sharp with barbed wire, the guards still armed. But inside their minds, a new battle had begun, the struggle between hatred and the recognition of humanity in the enemy. And it had all begun with a single barbecue, a meal that seemed meaningless, yet carried the power to shake their very souls. That evening, the sky over Guam burned crimson, like the remnants of fire after a blistering day. In the camp yard, the Americans lit their grills once again. The smell of barbecue rose and spread through the air. To the soldiers, it was routine. But to the Japanese women prisoners, it was the toll of a final storm breaking inside their souls. A group of younger prisoners, the ones who had once dared to taste the barbecue, sat close to the fence. Their eyes no longer hid or wavered. They looked straight into the rising smoke, as if openly acknowledging their hunger. In contrast, the older women gathered in a corner, faces stiff, lips trembling, eyes blazing with rage. Soon, the familiar American officer appeared, holding a tray of glistening red meat. He smiled and extended it through the fence. This time, hesitation was gone. A young woman reached out and took it without a second thought. That moment broke the dam. An elderly prisoner shot to her feet, screaming, "You've sold your souls to the enemy!" Her voice echoed, and the camp erupted in chaos. Some wept, some cursed, others laughed in despair. The lines blurred. Even those who had clung to honor now shed tears of longing. Those who had eaten stood tall, refusing to be branded traitors. In the midst of the uproar, the naval officer's widow, the first to bite into barbecue days before, stepped into the center. Her face was ashen, her eyes dark and hollow. Raising her hand, she spoke, her voice hoarse yet commanding. "Call me a traitor if you wish. But tell me, who here is not hungry? Who here can swear to survive on honor alone?" The camp fell silent. No answer came. Only the faint crackle of flames drifted from the grill beyond the fence. She went on, her voice trembling but unyielding. Honor does not become rice. Loyalty does not become strength. If I die here, who will remember me? The emperor, or only my family, weeping at my grave? I would rather live to see my homeland one last time, even in shame, than die here with an empty stomach. With that, she turned, snatched a skewer from the officer's hand, and bit deeply. Tears streamed down her face, not from memory this time, but from release. A sob escaped the crowd. Then another woman stepped forward, trembling as she accepted a piece. Then another and another. Soon, a line of hands stretched out through the fence. It was a strange, wrenching scene, half the camp crying, half laughing. Some fell to their knees, whispering apologies. Others ate while sobbing aloud. Still others burst into broken laughter, the sound sharp and bitter, as if tasting both life and defeat in the same mouthful. yet a few eyes remained resolute. An old woman with hair as white as snow turned her face away, tears rolling down her cheeks, lips pressed tight. She did not reach out, did not speak. Her silence was her final declaration. Her honor was not for sale, no matter the flavor. The American officer looked on, his expression unsettled. Perhaps he had never imagined that a tray of meat could unleash such a storm within human hearts. That night, the camp was unnaturally quiet. Those who had eaten curled up in confusion, feeling both saved and stripped of something sacred. Those who had refused turned their backs, but peace eluded them too. Both sides were wounded, neither whole. In the darkness, a young girl whispered, "Maybe we are no longer the Japanese women we once were. Maybe we are just human beings who want to live." Her words drifted into the night. No one replied, but they stayed, echoing like a crack that could never be sealed. The next day, the Americans lit their grills again. Smoke rose into the sky, but this time no one reacted with outrage. They only watched, their eyes filled with hunger, weariness, and resignation. In the end, what haunted them was not the meat itself, but the harsh truth it revealed. War could strip away honor faster than bombs or bullets, sometimes with nothing more than smoke and a piece of grilled meat. And from then on, when many remembered their time in the camp, it was not the guards' rifles or the fences of barbed wire that haunted them most. It was a single meal from the enemy, a meal that had become the fiercest battlefield of all, fought inside their own hearts.